Our community strives to celebrate every person who comes to our sanctuary. You are welcome here. The spirit of the single statement epitomizes the greatness of Unitarian Universalism. Universal welcome to the afterlife. You know, coming from the Catholic tradition, I learned a lot about who is not welcome. Unless you've jumped through some baptismal hoops, you're not getting in the gates. That's why we open with a call that is a first principle for us, not just being inclusive, but reaching out. So whether you ran in here in little feet, turned in virtually, or walked in briskly, or ambled in or rolled in, you are welcome here. And then we hit the historically disrespected and marginalized groups. Whatever your complexion or orientation or gender expression, you are welcome here. Unitarian Universalism is committed to the idea that every person has inherent worth and dignity. And then you are welcome here, whatever your political beliefs. Many of you remember Bill Minster. He's a revered member of NSUC, and when Sundays, when he had Gail's job and he'd open, he had this booming voice with this side falsetto. He would say, whatever your complexion or orientation or gender expression or political beliefs, you are welcome here. Many of us during coffee hours admit to whiplash after this. Aren't there some political beliefs that don't seem to fit nicely with Unitarian Universalism? Consider some of these. Immigrants are sources of drug and crime that threaten the natural residents of America. Women should not have ultimate decisions about their health. Poverty is a sign of weakness. Competent people are not poor. Our gun control is given into weaklings who are unable to defend themselves. Really? I'm going to try to make sense of this assertion with two questions today. One, can we, Unitarian Universalism, really do this? Can we welcome people with all sorts of political beliefs? And two, how are we doing? Are we welcoming people with different political beliefs? So let me start with the first one. Can we really welcome all comers and their beliefs? I think Donald Trump is actually a PR rep for George W. Bush, because I get violently ill at some of what Bush too did as president. The war in Iraq, Guantanamo Bay, extraordinary rendition, enhanced interrogation. But then just a few years of Donald Trump, and I'm thinking George Bush was the golden age of America. Why is it that the rhetoric of Donald Trump and his stubborn conservative wing of the Republican Party has so strongly challenged my views of who's welcome here? My father was a loud and assertive Republican. He used to say, seriously, Richard Nixon was one of the greatest presidents of our time. He'd do this mostly to get his goat of his youngest son. But make America great again? I'm not sure. Donald Trump, MAGA, and the Proud Boys elicit a visceral response. Is this a fundamental flaw of the ultra-right? Because if so, maybe some people just aren't welcome here. They are basically flawed. My mom once told me, and therefore it's ingrained in my DNA, my mom told me that there are always two sides to an argument. In part, she did this when refereeing tussles between my older brother, Mike, and I. No one is right. And I used to find solace in this because not only is the other side not the epitome of collapse, but there's actually something worth reaching out to there. And you know, the left can sometimes be extreme. Antifa, anti-fascist, news media have documented Antifa throwing Molotov cocktails in the Berkeley protests after Milos Yiannopoulos lectured at Berkeley in 2017. And they used clubs and dyed liquid against the white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia. Antifa has been likened to Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and the Muslim Brotherhood, according to the counter-extremism group of Germany. Now, this may be a cherry-picked description, focusing on a few bad eggs. Antifa, according to these rejoinders, is actually peaceful. Of course, that is what white supremacists would say. So let's take a more nuanced view of what is meant by political beliefs. And excuse me, let me be a psychologist for a minute and unpack it in terms of cognitive and emotional components. Cognitive is the content of the belief. From a debater's view, I think I can sit down and thrash out different responses to key issues. How do we handle immigration problem, border walls and laws versus welcoming people as humans? The details can be put on a chalkboard and give and take exchange. You know, cognition debate sounds like there's rules governing the process here. My son Abe is a debate coach at Glenbrook High School, and I sat in on some lively exchanges between them. Might that not apply here? For example, immigration. We need to agree what to do with the borders and coming to the U.S., and these are tough decisions. The problem, unfortunately, is that modern discourse seems to have no rules. Sure, Abe's debate can be lively and posturing and often guilty of not listening, but at the end of the day, there seems to be some endpoint. Modern discourse across the political aisle seems to have lacked civility. The reason? This is probably not a cognitive issue. This is probably more an emotional issue. And we know emotions are strong drivers of thought and of behavior, often not bound by logical rules. One candidate emotion is fear. Fear is a first-order emotion, always trumping thoughts and behaviors. According to Abraham Maslow, who we all learned in Psych 101, he has his hierarchies of needs, and once we get by the physiological stuff, food, air, water, and heat, it's all about safety. Self-actualization is the top, baby, but you aren't going anywhere near that if you're scared. Followed by the panic of fight or flight, neither which is especially conducive to sitting down and sharing ideas. Political discussion often threatens safety when ideas encroach on basic resources and possibilities needed to achieve goals and realities. I think the fear divide is especially noticeable between the haves and the have-nots. And I think we must admit the UUs tend to be loaded for the haves. Good education, fulfilling careers, comfortable homes. Encroachment is more noticeable in those with lesser resources, perhaps. Never used to be that way. Moving to alternative energies threatens my livelihood as a coal miner. And change is especially noticeable with groups who are different than me. You know why things are changing? Because of those foreigners or blacks or Native Americans or LGBTQ people. If we just went back to the way it was, the threat would go away. I think the problem with fear is that it's associated oddly with righteousness. This may be an example less of fear of the material world and more the spiritual one. Many religions have long lists of damnable acts. Violating rules against these acts leads to righteousness. Abortion, LGBTQ identity are clear violations of commandments from God. There's no difference of opinion here, no choice. Certain beliefs are wrong. Fear and righteousness are demanding and mobilizing. I need to act at any cost. Fear has been a driving force of opinion and action through history, often to the worst. But perhaps the biggest emotion or need, or whatever psychologists would call it, is narcissism. Political leaders use fear to snare support of a block of people for their own gains. Let's be clear, this is present in most leaders around the world and much of history, but Donald Trump has owned it to a fine art. He embodies everything that is narcissistic and fear-mongering. I'm hesitant to punch Donald because he's like a piñata, low-hanging fruit, the poster boy of liberal fury. Because I know also, though, that there are friends and neighbors and churchgoers, people who may be okay with Trump or may be okay with the Proud Boys. And when I think about you are welcome here, can we, should we welcome MAGA? It's not really what he believes, but why and how he does it, how he incites anger and hatred, and the degree to which this is based on cynicism. And narcissism breeds on falsehoods. I think when we are immersed in current events in real time, it's hard to see whether at all time we are at an all-time low in honesty. We've had American leaders in the past who have strained truth, but things like the great lie of the 2020 presidential election are lightning rods for distrust. Truth is in the eye of the beholder. Once again, I think it wise to remember there are two sides to everything. I actually think an eroded source of basic truth may be found on both sides of the political discourse. On one side, there is Fox News. On the other side, there's MSNBC, and both can be guilty here. And some of these issues are so amazingly complex. Let's go back to immigration. Seems to me that helping people with low means come to the United States, often escaping horrible violence in their homeland, that seems to me to be a truth. But does it become a bit foggier when trying to understand how does the U.S. absorb all these people and the risk in people coming across the border? There's a general sense of distrust in government. I know that shocks you. The Pew Research Center has been tracking public trust in government since 1958, when it was around 75% during the Eisenhower administration. 75% of Americans said they trusted government. Now, it's as low as 20%. And again, this represents both sides of the aisle, Dems not trusting Republicans, Republicans not trusting Dems, and everybody who's skeptical of the government. But go back to that Trump guy and some of the grotesque falsehoods about his business dealings or his sexual troubles, and it's never the lie alone. It's what it does to the election workers who are threatened around the country to undermining a fundamental tenet of democracy. A lie that keeps on giving. Consider Carrie Lake from Arizona, who's still arguing the November 21st gubernatorial election in Arizona. And what saddens me here is a downright deceitful, narcissistic reason for these lies and the harm it does. But pointing the other side is easy. Let's consider my second question. How are we doing? How is UUA and NSC doing with "you are welcome here"? We try to proudly be inclusive of people diverse in so many wonderful ways, complexion and orientation and gender expression. And I have to admit, this is one big draw for my wife Georgie and I to come every Sundays. But what about political beliefs? Is this a place where Republican or conservative ideas might come? Who here would want to consider the right to choose a woman's health with limits embodied by the right to life? Or balancing calls for climate solutions with the economic needs of the working class? I have to admit, I truly hesitate mentioning this in my community here because I'm thinking, wow, he's sort of over there. I decided to leave it to you as a projective test today for where you think I fall on the issues. But I will admit, I'm an old guy, and young people, the secret about old guys is to become fiscally conservative. I don't mean a knee-jerk response to the government's grabbing for my pocketbook. Georgie and I have been fortunate and sit well in terms of income. I'm frankly willing to pay more taxes, but you know that trust issue? I just don't always trust the legislature to call for more taxes to fund anything more than their pet flavor of the month. And so let's talk about a hard one. While I cherish the goals of universal education, kindergarten through graduate school, I sometimes believe the facile answers of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and AOC have their own form of dishonesty when putting out quick fixes without being clear how they're going to pay for it. Concerns about deficit spending will not be resolved by blindly kicking it down the road. But you know, UUs have their own example of not quite welcoming based on belief. Consider the case of Todd Eckloff. I'm not sure many people know Todd. He's a minister at the UU Church in Seattle, and he's author of the Gadfly Papers, a collection of essays challenging political correctness in our church. Like a good gadfly, he's provocative. Stan McCracken, my mentor, once said, UUs not only have the right to be critical, but the duty. UUA, according to Eckloff, is guided by political correctness and safetyism. The UUA is guided by white supremacists and supremacy and coddling the UU mind. And so Eckloff, the UU minister, calls for a divorce between the U and the U. You can get his book online. I did. I read it. You know, I'm a college professor, so I'm cranky by definition. I thought it was a little sophomoric and self-centered. But what concerns me is that the UU Ministerial Association's reactions to Eckloff's writing. About a year ago, I read a pronouncement from the UU Ministers Association calling for, and I quote, Eckloff's censure, accusing him of breaking covenant. Like a good investigative reporter, I searched for the quote again, preparing for today, doing a deep dive in the archives, where I eventually found a website that said the censure statement had been taken down. That has an unfortunate Trumpian feel to it. I would think UUs really, really want to avoid anything smelling of censure because we're basking in apostasy and the ironic, joyful claims we make. So what do we do about it? Let's start focusing on the line we draw between us and them, liberals and conservatives, MAGA and everyone else. Karen Barnes and Joseph Barr last year examined this issue from the rock, proposing what I thought was a great solution. Braver Angels, a group that emerged in 2016 as America's polarization became more and more evident. The group's name comes from a quote from Lincoln's first inaugural address when North and the South had huge fractures. He said, "We are not enemies, but friends. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone are all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched as surely as it will be by the better angels of our nature. Better angels morphed into braver angels to reflect the courage it takes." I did a little bit of a dive into it. It's a well-thought-out prescription for getting people from diverse backgrounds together. We looked at it at my university. The challenge, however, is better angels speaking to the choir. The challenge is getting reds and blues who are able to see the benefits of this kind, who are able to reach across the aisle and have the skills to do something they reach. Sure, I will reach out warmly to people with differing political attitude that wish to engage with me on the challenges of our time. Keep in mind, these are many of my dad and mom and brother who do not have the evil motives of Donald Trump. But there is that Donald Trump guy. One who is motivated to battle about ideas, not talk about solutions. And so, turn the other cheek. That's from one of the greatest preachings in history, Jesus of Nazareth, and his Sermon on the Mount. He began with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor of spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then he transitioned to the law. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If everyone slaps you in the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek. And then he continued, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. These are radical words. Human psychology, or at least the Western version of it, is grounded by individuals and self-interest. How does a social exchange like this meet our individual needs? Turn the other cheek next time I'm with a Proud Boy. I'm saying, okay, I believe in the power of diversity, and I understand your desire to reassert a white agenda. But I believe that turning the other cheek has importance even more on an emotional side. Maybe it diffuses lines between people and their opinions so alternative views can be reached. Turn the other cheek is the basis of the New Testament, Jesus Christ crucified on the cross. But in our own history, there are flashbulb examples, like the Vietnam-era college students tensely facing off against the National Guard. One student slipped a daisy into the barrel of a soldier's gun. And that man at Tiananmen Square during the 1989 demonstrations who faced down a line of tanks in the street. These images burn in our memory of humanity over violence. Nonetheless, theologians wrestle with limits to turning the other cheek. Never again is a compelling response. Frequently voiced in response to the Holocaust, the Jewish community, no, the civilized world will never again tolerate like images of anti-Semitism that led to the horrors beyond imagination. Never again can the egregious wishes of white supremacy cause the pains that racism brought to our land. To give them a voice seems to be complicit in the dark side. So you're welcome here, regardless of your political beliefs. Reducing this to cognition, I'm probably willing to welcome here people with beliefs that perhaps represent fear of foreigners and blacks and LGBTQ and the well-educated and convicts and people with HIV/AIDS. Your beliefs are welcome here. Your emotions, your style, your prevarications, your lies, maybe not. And so I feel like I failed today. Because when I look at Lucas, he puts everything in a nice box with wrapping and a bow on it and a clear answer. I don't have that today about whether you're welcome here. I do wish us to consider, though, another beatitude. Blessed are those who reach across the aisle seeking dialogue in order to better understand.